This session is entitled Tell Your Stories, Creating a Timeline. This is from the Howard County, Kokomo-Howard County Public Library in the Genealogy and Local History Department, and I am Ron Tetrick, a genealogy assistant. There is an old expression that says people see, but they don't observe. However, one's memory records a lot more than we give it credit for. In writing about someone else's experiences, you will need to be the eyes and the ears of your audience and use a lot of imagination to bring the person you are recreating back to life. Describing surroundings, smells, and sounds is an art. Even inanimate objects deserve equal consideration. Depending on the times in which your story takes place, liberal use of verbs, adjectives, and adjectives, and other types of modifiers can excite the mind of the reader or the listener. Suppose, for example, that your character fed his family by fishing in a local stream. As he approaches the bank of the stream, you might write, "He looked at the beautiful flowing stream." However, if you write, "He stood there, mesmerized, taking in the white, frothy, icy cold mountain waters, swirling in and around hundreds of jagged rocks, creating momentary reflections like a million diamonds dancing in the sunlight," you have created a scene that is easier to visualize. Add color, such as golden, silently falling leaves, or sounds like gentle cooing of turtle doves, or perhaps the screeching of a barn owl attacking a helpless field mouse. And add smells, pungent piles of bur oak sawdust, or perhaps soft ginger cookies steaming and their spicy fragrances into the room. You must hold the attention of your audience as they imagine the scenes you are retelling. Speculate on your character who might have been feeling emotionally drained or distraught when engaged in a war, or perhaps preparing to pack up and move his young, vulnerable family on an arduous trip across forbidding, wild, and unknown mountains. Fill in as much detail as you can by researching the time and the place of the event and what was transpiring in that moment. Every age has dealt with numerous changes, social upheavals, happiness, sadness, joy, and pain, and a plethora of individual struggles. A wife has died of milk fever, and there are 2 small children and a crying baby left behind. What does the father do? Where does he turn for help? In your retelling of the story, you are leaving a legacy for future generations. Draw them into the adventure and instill an appreciation for the stamina, courage, and endurance your character demonstrated. Use an unexpected opening. A pack of screaming, half-naked Indian braves unexpectedly bursting through the cabin doorway, hatchets and rifles raised, knocking over a churn and kicking over a plank table, spilling bowls and cups in a tumble of crashing confusion. Can you envision such a scene? If you can, so will your audience. Such a scenario occurred when Frances Slocum was dragged off at an early age into the woods, never to see her mother again. She died as Maconaqua, the widow of a Miami chief southeast of Peru, Indiana. Never assume that your audience knows the circumstances of what you are retelling. None of us can directly relate to a snow blizzard in the Sierra Mountains in January 1850. We need to feel the chilling cold air striking and freezing our faces, and the impenetrable darkness outside the drafty cabin with the invisible howling wolves and the pounding blizzard of wet snow forcing its way around the tiny oil paper window and numbing the fingers and toes of a young child sitting at a makeshift table with no food. Always Research your presentation and rehearse it very carefully. If you are writing the story, read it out loud to a small audience in order to see what kind of reactions you can stir in them. If it is not believable, then you have not accomplished your task. Begin by constructing a timeline. The first thing we consider is life cycle, birth and birthing customs, health and lifestyle practices, lack of medicine, poorly understood diseases and epidemics, mental health, mortality rates, death and burial customs, or life at home, clothing and fashions, local foods and cooking methods, housekeeping, land and property, or even alcohol and drug use or abuse. Life at work, economy. What were the prices, the cost of living and salaries, occupations, working conditions, and the labor movement, businesses and employers, social welfare and relief. Relationships, morality, marriages and divorce or separation, childbearing, children and childhood in general, ethnicity and prejudices, because they did exist. And there's community life, celebrations and holidays that took place during this person's time, family traditions, education, language and literacy. Maybe the person could not speak English. Religion and worship structure, faith, crime and punishment, societal unrest, and leisure pursuits. And of course, there are game changers, floods, famines, war, immigrations, inventions, transportation, communication, slavery, and emancipation. Of course, you will not have all of this information at your fingertips, so you will need to learn how to research not only your particular ancestor, but also the environment in which he or she existed. Are there family artifacts that can help you tell the story? Are there old clothes or shoes that have survived? Is there a quilt or an apron made by a great-grandmother? Is there an old family Bible with names and dates of birth, marriage, and death? Who filled out the pages? How can you tell when you determine somebody's handwriting changes? Who continued to add data? Are there pieces of old dresses or locks of hair or dried flowers from funeral bouquets tucked between the pages of a Bible? Did someone write on the cover page of an old book, "This book belongs to," and there's a name, "and was given to me by a certain date and a person," such as a mother, father, a grandparent, or a friend? This will expand your timeline out greatly. Does handmade furniture exist? Who made it? How did he make it? Are there old school books or toys that have survived? Here's a McGuffey reader. You might find some interesting things scribbled inside on the pages or along the edges. Is there a set of silverware or dishes hiding in a cupboard or an attic? Are there old photographs in a shoebox? Did someone keep a diary? Look around, ask around. You may be surprised at what you find. Recreate the environment. Did this person live in the countryside or in a small village or a bustling town or a colonial city? Who were the neighbors and how far away did they live? Where were the older or the younger siblings? Were there other children who died young? What diseases carried them away? Who were the what was happening around these people? Were there half siblings or step brothers or sisters? Who else lived under the same roof? Grandparents, unmarried aunts and uncles, cousins, housemaids, farm laborers? Were these people related or were they neighbors? Who lived down the road or street? Were they related somehow? Did the family regularly attend a church or a meeting house? How religious were they? Were there ministers, priests, or nuns in the family? If the person was the minister or a priest or a nun, what records exist to validate that fact? Did the target person fight in a war? Has anything survived from that time period? Did the family move often or remain in one place? Can you discover why movement or not was connected to wanderlust, the lure of cheaper land, or the fact that family were tenants or landholders and moved on because they just could not afford to live there any longer? What dramatic events were occurring during the lifetime of this person which would have caused him or her to be a fugitive or a refugee? There's a difference. Fugitive, the law is tracking you down. If you're a refugee, you're escaping the law. Who was left behind? Who accompanied this individual immigrating to a new land? Did the father travel alone and then right back, or travel back to bring his wife and children to a new land? People do not exist in a vacuum. Try to identify others in the community who may have influenced or motivated this target person to move. After the children were grown and left home, what was life like? Did one or more of the children remain in the home to care for aging parents? Census records will help to identify occupants of a house every 10 years. Note the dimensions to the family as the children leave home and form homes of their own. Did they marry in the same religious denomination? Is there a will which designates how a person divided his or her estate? Often older children received compensation or land before the will was created, and there may be mention of these facts in the will. If a child had died, the grandchildren are often named as the heirs. At the end of life, what preparations were made for the funeral and the burial of the body? Was a doctor called to verify the time and place of death? Who were the pallbearers? Does any current relative have ownership of the deed for the grave plot? A cemetery board or a sextant may have records that will explain what happened. Note the style of the tombstone. Composition and sculpting of a gravestone changed over time and in different regions. Has an old limestone marker been replaced by a more modern one? Was the original stone left on the grave? Is there a military marker for someone who served in service? What kinds of flowers, shrubs, or trees decorate the gravesite? Does anyone continue to maintain the site and place memorial flowers in remembrance? Does a diary relate annual visits to the site? If a spouse is not buried beside the departed, where was he or she buried? Often a widow remarried, but was buried beside her first husband with whom she had children. Likewise, a second spouse may have been buried with a previous husband or a wife because of the wish of surviving children. Often bodies were buried chronologically in church cemeteries and no space was left for a surviving spouse. Try to untangle the burial process in your family. Was there a printed obituary in a local newspaper or a card with black edging or black background sent to friends and relatives, such as this one? Does the funeral folder give additional details? Was there an article in the newspaper about the demise of the person, relating events in his or her life or importance in the community? If your person was involved in politics or was a minister or another public official, there was often an article written about that person. If the person was affiliated with a lodge or other organization, there was often a notice published recognizing that person's accomplishments. Did the children remain in the community or move away? Were any relatives left behind, or did all of them move or die in the same community? Sometimes the youngest child remained in the family home and died childless many years later. If so, who took care of closing the estate? Who had power of attorney? Often an estate was in limbo for years before the title to land could be cleared for resale. Court records will reveal all these details. Once you are finished with the timeline, begin to write the story. If there are significant gaps, attempt to locate resources to complete the storyline. Often newspapers, printed weekly, articles written by local people about happenings in a particular township or a church or a family news. These articles are poorly indexed and may force you to read through several issues to discover the items you need to flesh out the life of an individual. Local histories are also helpful. Articles written about other individuals who were contemporary with your target person may make mention of him or her and how their lives intertwined. Look for prints or photographs that were contemporary with your timeline individual. Is the record house remaining from the period? Does a country church still remain where the family worshiped? Is there an old gnarled tree that was alive when your person was living? Are there other buildings which have survived from the time period? The more you can incorporate in your story, the better. You may also want to include a pedigree chart and family group sheets at the end of your report. If you have a document or references to statements in the story, will you place these at the bottom of the narrative pages or in a section at the end of the story? A story without documentation is hearsay and myth. There are many bound volumes in the genealogy department which have no documentation. What Grandma told you is not a fact. It is hearsay. Now, she may have been correct, but you must endeavor to prove what she told you. Come in and join us in the genealogy department. We're in the main library downtown in the lower level. Thank you for listening.